Major funding for these broadcasts is made possible by grants from Capital One Bank, New York Community Bank, Eastern Consolidated, M&T Bank, Sterling National Bank, Meridian Capital Group, Customers Bank, Ariel Property Advisors, Dime Community Bank. Additional funding is made possible by grants from AM Trust Title, AVR Realty Company, Avison Young, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Chase Commercial Mortgage, Citizens Bank, CPEX Real Estate Services, Colliers International NYC, Cohen Equities, Collins Building Services, Douglaston Development, Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handler Real Estate Organization, Handro Properties, Hodges Ward Elliott Inc., Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Madison Realty Capital, Matone Group, Mercantile Bank, New Banks, Newmark Knight Frank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Group, SJP Properties, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Meringoff Family Foundation, the Moynihan Organization, Moynihan Capital Partners, and these friends.
Consumers love to shop. They want to go. They go to retailers, or are they retailers? Or they go to e-commerce. What's happening today in the retail environment? So I've assembled these three gurus of retail to provide their insight on what's happening in the retail market. My guests include Chris Conlon, who is the Executive Vice President, Chief Operating Officer of Acadia Realty Trust, Ben Bernstein, who is the co-founder and principal of RedSky Capital, and last but not least, the man I call the guru of retail leasing, Gene Spiegelman, Vice Chairman of Cushman and Wakefield. So this is perception that retail is really not doing well. Is the perception real, or is it based on location, or what are we seeing?
Well, the perception is as real as the headlines, and the headlines are a little bit overinflated, I think. The headlines really relate to department stores and malls. We own neither. So speaking selfishly for Acadia Realty Trust, department stores are really having a hard time. And they're probably rapidly approaching distinction in some cases, but not all. Regional malls, we probably have too many in this country, and hundreds may close in the next 3 to 5 years. So those are the headlines, and that's what you read about. And there is distress in legacy retail that hasn't evolved, that hasn't found a way to connect with the new customer, a millennial customer. That hasn't found a way to navigate the tricky business of all-channel commerce, whether it's at the store or online or in their wholesale business through department stores. So a lot of changing factors. No one is really the reason why retail is under pressure, but there's a lot of great success stories at the same time. And we'll talk about those this morning. And really what I like to talk about, and Gene was talking about it a few moments ago, is what we call young brands that are emerging. There's a tremendous amount of enthusiasm.
You mean, are we saying young brands because of Ben? Based on the age of our buddy over here?
Yes.
So what are the young brands? Okay, you have unique retail locations. Let's talk about who are the tenants? Who are you attracting? Who's looking at it?
Well, if you walk through Soho, for example, on last weekend, there were 2 stores that had lines around the corner. Everlane, which opened its first store ever, started 5 years ago, had a line around the corner on Prince Street, and Supreme has a line every day.
So for my audience, I know, what is Everline and what is Supreme?
Everlane is a brand that sells elevated basics. So think Vince, James Purse, think, you know, in a lot of ways competitor to Madewell or J. Crew. Supreme is sort of the brand for the skater community, young millennial skaters. It's streetwear. It's urban streetwear.
Now, are those
elevated?
Now, will those tenants go to Williamsburg?
They are in Williamsburg. Well, to be fair, Supreme is in Williamsburg. Everlane just opened their first store 2 weeks ago.
Interestingly,
we'll
Everlane is that company whose CEO said that we will never have a physical store. Very famous quote.
Yes.
And now they're opening physical stores. It's not a gotcha moment or an I told you so, but it really does.
Look, if we look at Warby Parker, I think the greatest example, they initially started only on the web, and now they must have at least 20 stores?
I think there's more than that actually today.
I think they're at 60.
Yeah.
But Everlane's CEO also said recently that he felt his customer needed to touch the product, feel the product, have an experience in a store where they could really figure out what they wanted and what looked good on them, not just buying it and then sending it back. And so this is the first of hopefully many for Everlane, which is a great business and a great price point.
You happen to have a wonderful Target in Brooklyn. It's a large store. Are we, you know, there's the new Target Express or the smaller one. Are we seeing the compressing of the Target and the Walmarts more in the metro area?
Our Target store in Brooklyn is not large. It's small relative to their fleet. So their fleet is 140,000 square feet.
Right, but you're at what, 100?
Ours is 87. Their sales area is 87,000 square feet. So it's what Target calls their flexible format stores, which are smaller, more focused on the urban markets where they can't get a large store. So they're happy to take in niche markets 15,000 square feet, what they did in DC and Chicago, or 30 to 40,000 square feet where they've done here in town. They just opened on 34th Street very, very successfully. So Target is one of those great retailers that is finding a way to evolve and adapt to more opportunities in the urban markets. Very smart.
I would agree with that. It's not about necessarily them shrinking the footprint. It's about really how to get more market penetration for their brand. So the stores that they're doing in Manhattan represent you know, a creative approach to entering the marketplace. And I think Target's always been creative in entering the New York marketplace where other competitors in their category have failed. And it goes back probably about 20 years now when they first came into the boroughs and have been very successful at it. But Michael, I like to sort of go to the macro part of this conversation about retail, because what we see is all these headlines about negativity in retail. But the truth is retail is doing great. So the whole retail sector, we have a $5 trillion retail economy. Retail is growing. So sales through the holiday Black Friday were really about 4% over last year, and retailers are anticipating overall retail sales for 2017, 3 to 4% in total over 2016. We see growth in retail every year, other than in the recession year 2010-11.
But we're seeing growth in a different form. Like Ben was talking about Supreme, and Everline. Okay, those were different type of retailers. We're seeing growth in Warby Parker, if we're talking about 60 stores. We're seeing growth today in movie theaters, as you were saying, with your location in Brooklyn and what's happening. So there's been a change. Okay, at one time landlords were overjoyed to have that big grocery anchor supermarket, and you were saying prior to the show, I'd rather have an Aldi or a Trader Joe's or a specialty.
It's hard to argue against grocery anchored as a inflation, or excuse me, a recession resistant model, because people have to eat. However, traditional grocery stores that haven't evolved to customer pickup and specialty items and organic are trailing leaders, what we call specialty grocers. This is what we were talking about earlier: Sprouts, Aldi, Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, a few others that are Amazon Fresh. So there's a whole new wave of those that are smaller in their format, but are also more exciting to co-tenants you're trying to attract into your property. So a conventional grocer is not as exciting anymore as a specialty grocer in terms of leasing around that.
You know, I could see in some of your locations in Brooklyn more of the Trader Joe or more of the Sprout type of store coming in on the grocery. And I could also possibly see what we've seen right now. I mean, Amazon has 13 bookstores. over there. They've opened up a large number this year, and they have 2 bookstores over here. I could see an Amazon in Brooklyn.
So can I. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of their customers are in Brooklyn. I think Brooklyn is basically the same size as Chicago at this point. To not consider that makes limited sense. What makes Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or Sprout or Aldi so unique is it's even though it's still a grocery store, it's specialized. It speaks to the client. And one of the things that makes that we're seeing in retail is that people don't want a one-stop shop. They want an experience, and they want something that speaks to them and what they're looking for. They don't want to get everything in one place. They can do that online. They want something that really makes them feel like this is for them.
So what new retailers are we seeing entering the marketplace in the metro area?
Well, I think if you look at the market, it's segmented, and I think a lot of brands, we had this discussion about brands moving from e-com into brick and mortar, and you look at a couple in particular, Bonobos and Untuckit, really looking at growing their online business, growing their brick and mortar business. Warby Parker obviously has followed that same model. And we did this analysis, and it's probably 250 e-com pure play brands out in the marketplace today that probably do $2-3 billion in sales, and these are going to be the fertile ground of new retailers. This is what's going to replace the old, and it's going to be the new, and we are just on the cusp of this emerging trend. I look at it, it's all's retail today, and forget e-com, forget brick and mortar. This is what the retail future is, 2017 being a transition year for that. And I think 2018 beyond, we're going to start seeing more of these new brands. We are just at the tip of the iceberg of this trend.
Now, I think people are streaming, Hulu, Netflix, Amazon Prime, okay? People are watching all these shows and movies on their devices, but more and more people are going to the movie theaters, correct?
Yeah, the movie theater business is transitioning also. And again, it's another good example of an industry adapting to customer desires and trends. So your traditional movie theater was a sloped floor theater where you bought stale popcorn and 3 flavors of soda, and you were supposed to be happy with that. New theaters like Alamo in downtown Brooklyn in our City Point project, smaller formats. The auditoriums are all different sizes. One is as small as 43 seats, larger seats, tables, food and beverage delivered to you while you watch the movie. Some recliners, food and beverage delivered to you while you're watching the movie.
Great food.
Then very good food, right?
It's fantastic.
Yeah,
I love going there.
Yeah, they do a great job. But then also a large format restaurant and bar is part of the theater, so you can stay after or come before. Event-driven, very event-driven. They'll do a week-long Japanese horror film festival that's sold out. They did a Wonder Woman release where they only sold tickets to female customers. Got a lot of criticism, but that press was good for them. Bill and Hillary Clinton came and watched with their small group the It film that was released earlier this fall. So they're very social media savvy and conscious. They don't spend money on traditional advertising. They push through to social media, really connect with the community, and add a new element to a project that's different. It's not just a theater, it's an experience. Brooklyn in general has completely embraced them. It's been very successful.
One note about necessarily more people going, I don't know if it's more people, but cinema operators are learning how to be much more profitable and deliver what the public wants. Because effectively, if you took a traditional theater, say the size of Alamo, Brooklyn, an old theater like that would have had 1,000 or 1,500 seats. These have half as many seats. So where you had 1,000, you now have 500 because of the recliners and how they utilize space, having tables for food and beverage. They're just getting more profitability and more interest and consumer attraction to these new theater concepts as opposed to the traditional called slope floor or stadium seating theater.
So here's a question. Many owners of properties would really say the worst tenant I don't want to have is a restaurant, okay? Because, restaurants, 50% of them close all the time. How do you look at restaurants today? You're an owner, and you represent tenants.
They're 40% of the leasing market now. The leasing market used to be 40% apparel accessories. In the last year and a half, it's down to 25%, and food and beverage is really taking that as being 40% of velocity now. So very important.
We love food and beverage. We use it as a way to help curate our retail and bring the clients we want to our site. Sweet Green is a great brand that brings the right tenant to our property.
I think Sweet Green is the greatest example of what they've created. A great product.
It's amazing. It's down the block from our flywheel. And if I do a flywheel, and we're talking, and that's packed with people working out every day, I can't do a Shake Shack across the street, and I love Shake Shack or next door. I need to do something that fits for that client so I can keep them there shopping, spending money at my property.
I think this moves the conversation to a wildly overused term called experiential. Right? So customers are looking for an experience, and the word experiential shows up in every article that's written about this, but there's a lot of truth to it. Experiential can show up in a number of different ways. We like to think of it as two different ways. One, experiential relative to the project or the market, along the lines of what Ben was just talking about, where you're adding experiences, whether it's fitness, food, or something else, entertainment, to a market to make an overall curated experience for the customer. And then it can be in the store. So that food and beverage inside RH, what used to be called Restoration Hardware, is a spectacular execution of food combined with retail, or some other entertainment component.
I mean, Tiffany has just opened up a restaurant.
Yeah.
Okay, Barnes & Noble has opened up 6 restaurants.
Barnes & Noble Kitchen.
Barnes & Noble Kitchen. They have one in Eastchester.
Restoration Hardware in Chicago is
spectacular.
Is amazing. It's where everyone in
be
Chicago wants to go.
You want to
every
hang
day.
out there. And it's a great meal. It's not a good meal.
It's a great experience.
So smarter retailers and better owner-operators are looking at ways where they can add an experience into their market, their shopping center, or inside the retailers that they attract. Lululemon does a great job of yoga classes and yoga apparel and lectures. These kinds of experiences add a lot to, and it's what the customer wants. If you are a legacy brand and you're not finding it a way to make an emotional connection to your customer through an experience, you're probably going to fail. Easy to talk about, very hard to execute. We're seeing great examples throughout. The young brands that we're talking about, Outdoor Voices, Everlane, Faherty brands, Alo Yoga we talked about earlier, they all get it. They all get it. Every one of those brands is talking about an emotional connection to their customer and an experience in and around the store that adds to the retail execution.
And they're all doing it in different ways. All of those brands are doing it in very different ways. Alo Yoga has a yoga studio in every store. Everlane is focusing on massive transparency in that they show the customer where the product came from, where it was manufactured, how much it costs them to build a connection. And that connection is real.
And you can't create an emotional connection through a device, right? A screen, a phone, an iPad, a computer. There's no emotional connection that can be created. So those great brands that have an e-commerce business are finding ways to make that emotional connection, that experiential connection to their customer through the physical store. So we're sort of getting back to what worked originally, and that's where we get excited when we talk about young brands and what they can do in terms of their expansion over the next 1, 3, 5 years.
So what happens to the older brands for us, older people? What happens to the Gap, Old Navy? Because I read something that the one that's really doing well of the Gap, Old Navy, and Banana Republic is Old Navy. Old Navy is doing rather well, maybe because of the price point.
It's a fast fashion type of brand, and you're going to see, I think, in Banana Republic and Gap, continued shrinkage until they change their
What about J. Crew?
J. Crew is under pressure from debt, which adds to the woes of trying to find your new customer and invest in finding your new customer. So not unlike Neiman Marcus, they have the pressure of debt on their businesses as well, so it makes it harder to adapt. But if they don't adapt in the next coming years, you'll see the brand will be in trouble.
What about the proliferation of food halls? How many food halls can we have?
In this country, we're very good at grabbing something and completely overdoing it. And I think that the food halls are a very, very successful business model and a component to a great street or a great project. They are not the answer to fix every bad food court in every B and C mall.
I think you hit it right on the nose.
There'll be great food halls, and there'll be others, and the others probably won't succeed. But you know, it's tricky business. It's the curation of the right food hall vendors is really one of the keys, and design. It's curation of vendors and design that really carries the day. And for us who own institutional real estate, unless we connect with somebody who's a little bit more nimble and a little more creative around that execution, it's very hard to do. So I'm concerned that it'll become a little bit more pedestrian than it should, but we'll see.
If you center that conversation in a place like Midtown Manhattan, which is very from an accessible ability to find good food, it's hard in New York City in Midtown Manhattan. If you look at Fifth Avenue in particular, the fact that there's no great food options for the masses that come down here, it makes it more difficult to keep people on the avenue. I think something that's missing from our marketplace. If you went to London, for instance, and you go to Selfridges on Oxford Street, they have this amazing food hall. If you go to Harrods, they have this amazing food hall. It keeps people within those stores, keeps people within the neighborhood. So I think some areas are very understored in this particular concept. Not all food halls are created equal,
What
but we
about
can use better ones.
What about vertical retail? I mean, the irony is, a number of years ago when I used to write for the New York Sun, I really was knocking vertical retail because it didn't do well in Manhattan. Okay, Trump Tower was a failure. The location on 47th Street and Fifth Avenue was a failure. And then Time Warner Center opened, and it wasn't a failure. But a lot of stores changed over the period of time. A lot of tenants moved out. How do you see the Hudson Yards and the Far West Side?
Well, I think in particular, the biggest advocate for not calling it a vertical mall was Ken Himmel. When he really and Steve Roth executed on Time Warner, they connected it to the street and they made something different. That turn you just saw in the project was really, it was call it a 10-year term in the project. Rents only increased in the project and the tenancies evolved in the project. I think because of the level of their execution, that I think Hudson Yards is going to be an amazing project. And if you go to Hudson Yards and you look at the model and then you look out the window and go, oh my God, they built all this. And it looks better than the model. It's incredible density and modernism. It will do well.
The biggest question, and I've said this on my office shows about the Far West Side in general, is, you know, Time Warner Center, you have access, all the trains are over there. Hudson Yards, over there, you have one train. It's a distance.
It's a city in itself, and everything in Manhattan's moving to the west side, and I think that just population and the density of residential living will feed it as well as the office.
In the same way as a city by itself is the Oculus downtown. And I've been there 3 or 4 times recently, and every time I pass it, I see people outside of the stores and no one in the stores.
Well, in my opinion, the World Trade Center was always a transportation hub. And that's what it is. And maybe it was overdone in this iteration, but it's always been a transportation hub. It's where people move through. It's not where people stay. And I think that's going to go through a couple of generations of leasing. But as far as Hudson Yards, you know, a lot of people talk about Neiman Marcus and the future of Neiman Marcus. I look back to Time Warner, and if you remember where Whole Foods was, that was supposed to be a department store. And they couldn't make that deal. And they wound up putting Whole Foods in, which was the best thing that happened to the property.
Oh, that was a great situation.
Right. So I look at what could happen potentially in.
Right, but you're going to see that also because Brookfield, which is a block away from the Hudson Yards, has a Whole Foods
across the street, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Right across the street.
But in concept, these things emerge and go in directions that we don't anticipate.
Here's a subject that I hadn't brought up, but I want to bring up: the urgent care centers. There's such a large proliferation of urgent care centers. But how do you look at tendency of having an urgent care center?
Market to market, project to project. I think it's a net positive for me. I wouldn't want to see them on Spring Street in Soho, and they'll never be because the rents don't allow for that. But on the right properties in certain shopping centers, more suburban probably than urban, suburban shopping centers, it's a great use.
Because we just did one Northwell on Flatbush in Park Slope. And it's a community street. It's where people go to get their coffee, their groceries, their pharmaceuticals. It's where they go to live. It's like Lexington Avenue on the Upper East Side. It's necessary.
I have an article coming out with regard. It's hospital by hospital centric idea. Northwell has made a commitment, because they're in partnership with the United Healthcare, on the Go Health.
Yeah.
Okay. Then you take the situation of NYU Langone, and you take New York Pres, where they are doing telemedicine. So the telemedicine, they don't want to have an involvement with the urgent care center, because insurance reimbursement and everything, telemedicine is getting a higher number. So I think there's a question of who the urgent care center is. If it's owned by a major entity or somebody who's going to be there for the long run, it's fine. But if it's the mom and pop urgent care center, you may have a problem over
It's
there.
not, it's not retail. It's just a great
Right.
it's a great complementary use in terms of tenant mix for either a street or a project or a shopping center.
Or a community. Not everyone wants to go to the hospital or their doctor.
Right, in the
right
same
away.
way-
They want speed.
Are we seeing, there are two areas that we could talk about. One is the CVS Walgreen market, and then on the other side of the CVS Walgreen market, let's talk about the CVS, is the banking market, the reduction in the size of banks. Okay, today banks are closing. TD is reducing their footprint in their size. How do you look at banks and...
Well, just staying on the healthcare thing, you can't ignore the CVS Aetna deal and how that affects the retail footprint of a major provider of healthcare products. And I think whether it's a pediatric PM or a Northwell, we're going to see a great evolution in this whole particular
Right, but the
sector.
CVS approach with Aetna, CVS has had these mini clinics, but these mini clinics were staffed by nurses as opposed to the urgent care centers, which are staffed by physicians.
Well, if you need a flu shot, you don't need a physician.
I agree.
Right? If you're sick or if you've twisted your ankle, you need some sort of other broader delivery or offering by an urgent care facility. So it depends on what you need.
Now, what about the banks?
Banks are going to be around. Branches are still critical. We met with Chase a couple of weeks ago, and we do 3 or 4 times a year. We meet with Chase. We have them as a tenant in many of our properties, and their bank branches are getting smaller and smarter, but the bank branches aren't going away.
Bank branches
need
aren't
them.
going away. I think it's the question of the size.
Yeah, no, they're going to get
and the
smaller.
number of employees.
I think they went through the optimization of a large part of that over the last 5 years, and all the major brands have optimized their footprints. I find they're at stabilization. I think there will be continual shrinkage in that, but there also was the cry that all the banks are going to go away. That didn't happen. Customers spoke up and said, we still want to bank in a branch.
Ben's going to put a Bitcom ATM in his location.
I am absolutely not. I am a big fan of banks. We own community retail. Every community needs a whole host of things to be successful and vibrant. And I need a bank branch to do my business, not let alone what my girlfriend wants or needs or what my sister or mother want. Everyone needs that in their neighborhood.
Are we going to see bowling alleys and pool halls opening up again?
There's a couple of concepts around the country. One is called Pinstripes. The other one is called Punch Bowl Social, which incorporates a lot of entertainment into one facility. I was in one in Portland, I believe. Punch Bowl Social. So it's some bowling, and it's some billiards, and it's some darts, and it's Skittle Bowl, and it's a lot of booze, and
I see Dave & Buster's on a lot of sites.
just okay food, and yeah, there's a lot of concepts around that.
Dave & Buster's still strong?
Yeah.
Their brands in Brooklyn have really redone this whole brand and really made it cool and young and exciting. Brooklyn Bowl, Royal Palm, Shuffleboard.
What about virtual reality?
Jury's out.
Not seen it much on
Jury's
that
out.
yet.
Makes me busy.
So I think the summation is there's a transition taking place. And as you brought up, retail is not dead. People are still shopping. It's a question of delivery and services, and people like it. I'd like to thank Chris, Ben, and Gene, and I'll see you next week.